I wanted to show you an instrument, a musical instrument I just finished making. But first I'm going to show you one that I made about 12 years ago. This is just a piece of PVC pipe with some holes drilled in it and a couple wraps of electrical tape around the end. There's another piece, whereabouts unknown currently, that goes on here that allows you to plug a standard B-flat soprano clarinet mouthpiece in there, and then you can cover the holes with your fingers, and the fingering system's a little non-standard in order to maximize the number of notes I got out of the thing. But it's effectively it's a clarinet. It's a short clarinet. I think it's in the key D. If you wanted to make a B-flat clarinet or an alto clarinet or a bass clarinet, what you'd have to do is scale up the size of this thing, the length and so forth. And the problem with that is, as you scale up the size, the holes get further apart. So they get further apart, and before too long, they get to the point where you physically cannot reach the holes to cover them. And this is a problem that was faced by musical instrument makers back in the 17th, 18th centuries, trying to make large woodwind instruments, low-pitched woodwind instruments. And there were a number of solutions people tried. What ultimately we ended up with, of course, is instruments where you have a lot of keys, where you have a lever, and you press the lever in a hole, way down there, it gets opened up or closed. But if you're not using keys, what else can you do? Well, there was a guy named Papolini who, in the early 19th century, made a bass clarinet, which essentially, I think what he did was he basically took a plank and split it down the middle, and then he carved mirror image channels into the plank, so it made one cylindrical bore when he put it together. But it was not a straight channel; it was a channel that wiggled back and forth and back and forth, so that the length of the channel, as measured along the length of the channel, was a lot longer than the length as measured straight from the top to the bottom. And then he was able to drill holes into the bore that were close together, measured in a straight line, but they were further apart, measured along the length of the bore of the instrument. So after making this little D clarinet, I started thinking, well, what if you did something along the lines of what Papolini did, and instead of using PVC tubing, you used PVC, or in this case CPVC, fittings, like elbows. And you make something that wiggles back and forth. Could you make an instrument along the lines of what Papolini did? And I eventually convinced myself of several things. One is that rather than wiggling back and forth, what you really want to use, at least for most of the length, I think works better is a helix. So you've got like 4 of these elbows in a row, circling back around on each other. And every 4 elbows, you come back to the front of the instrument, and then you can drill the holes, and there'd be 4 elbows apart from each other along the length of it, but they'd be very close to each other in terms of their straight line distance. Another thing I convinced myself was, it's even if you use very, if you use 1/2-inch CPVC, for instance, which is considerably narrower than the bore of a typical bass clarinet or whatever, the length you get by using 4 L's is so long that forget about trying to make an alto clarinet. Forget about trying to make a bass clarinet. What you're making is a contrabass clarinet, okay? 2 octaves below a standard soprano clarinet. So anyway, I thought about that about 12 years ago, and I futzed around with it a little bit, and then I kind of put it aside, and I came back to it a few years later, and I put it aside and came back to it just recently and finally put something together. In the meantime, there's a guy named Lindsay Pollock, had a similar idea. He made a contrabass clarinet out of flexible tubing, which he poked holes into. And if you haven't seen any of Lindsay Pollock's videos on YouTube, you really ought to. But anyway, my attempt to do something like that is this thing here. Kind of messy looking. It's got, you know, all these splashes of purple PVC primer on it, and you know, traces of brown PVC cement and all that CPVC actually. And it's also a little crooked in a few places, but kind of sloppy. But it does what it does. You can see it's mostly, like I said, a helix made out of sets of 4 street elbows. The bottom turn of the helix, I'd added some tubing to make it longer, and then we got a piece down here extending out to the bottom, where I've got this piece here, which functions partly to project the lowest note forward rather than downward, and partly it's kind of just for looks. It looks a little better than just a dead end piece of tubing. It doesn't really function as a bell in terms of changing the tone quality or anything like that. You know, and then you've got a straight piece here going up to these 2 elbows here and down and up and around. And what you have here is a standard bass clarinet mouthpiece, which I've got a coupler here with some black electrical tape wrapped around it, and then it just jams inside the bass clarinet mouthpiece, and that all falling apart. That all works a whole lot better than it has any right to, really. Most of this is glued together. It does come apart, obviously, down there, and it comes apart here and up here. Anyway, the holes, there's 4 holes here, 1, 2, 3, 4 for these 4 fingers. The thumb is busy holding things up. 3 more holes here for these 3 fingers, and 1 more hole on the back for that thumb. All of which gives you a fingering system that's more or less like what you would have for a standard clarinet. So if, for instance, if you just have 1 thumb down and all the other holes open on a standard clarinet, that would give you what a clarinetist would call an F. In concert pitch, it's really an E flat. And on this instrument, it's also an E flat, but it's 2 octaves below a clarinet E flat, or the soprano clarinet E flat. And when I talk about the tuning of this instrument, I'm using the word tuning in a rather loose sense. It's not a precision-made instrument. Anyway, so, and then if you just open all the holes, then you've got a concert F, or what a clarinetist would call a G, again 2 octaves below a soprano clarinet. And then if you just cover the holes going downward, you get a downward E flat major scale. And that's that. It's really more of a contrabass Chalumeau than a contrabass clarinet. You know the term. The Chalumeau was sort of a predecessor instrument to the clarinet, and it was made to. It was mostly played and intended to be played just in the bottom register. You didn't normally overblow the thing. Anyway, so it only plays in the lower register.